Hey guys, welcome back to another video about psychology. This is going to be the last one, I think. At least it's our last unit. This is unit 10 about research methods. Hopefully on the screen you can see me working with my new watercolors that I got for my birthday. This is my first time testing them out, so the colors are kind of primary because I'm just trying something new, painting some mushrooms. Hope you guys are enjoying that. Let's get into it. What are some reasons that we can't rely solely on intuition and common sense? Well, for instance, we have hindsight bias, which is the tendency to believe after learning an outcome that one would have foreseen it. Then we also have judgmental overconfidence and our tendency to perceive order in random events. What is critical thinking? Thinking that does not blindly accept arguments and conclusions. Rather, it examines assumptions, assesses the source, discerns hidden values, evaluates evidence, and assesses conclusions. The scientific method and description. The scientific method is a self-correcting process for evaluating ideas with observation and analysis. Theory, an explanation using an integrated set of principles that organizes observations and predicts behaviors and events. Hypothesis, a testable prediction often implied by a theory. Operational definitions, a carefully worded statement of the exact procedures used in a research study. Human intelligence is what an intelligence test measures. Replicate, repeating the essence of a research study, usually with different participants in different situations to see whether the basic finding extends to other participants and circumstances. Descriptive methods. Three different ways to test a hypothesis are descriptive methods, correlational methods, and experimental methods. Descriptive methods describe behaviors, often by using case studies, surveys, or naturalistic observations. Correlational methods associate different factors or variables, and experimental methods manipulate variables to discover their effects. All right, and then we have this little chart here that I can't really put on the screen for you because even if I took a picture of it and put it on the screen, you wouldn't be able to read my handwriting, so just try to picture it. It's a 3x3 chart. Across the top it says research method and definition, advantages and disadvantages, and then down the left side it has case studies, naturalistic observation, and surveys. I'm going to read them boxes from left to right, so I'm going to read the title of the research method and its definition, the advantages of that research method, and the disadvantages of that research method, and then I'll go on to the next one. So, case studies are a descriptive technique in which one individual group is studied in depth in the hope of revealing universal principles. Some advantages of that are it shows us what can happen and suggests directions for further study, but the disadvantages of it are that it can mislead if an individual is atypical, and dramatic stories are more attention-grabbing than statistics, so it can lead some instance that was dramatic but not typical to be thought of as the norm because that's the thing that everyone remembers. Naturalistic observation is observing and recording behavior in naturally occurring situations without trying to manipulate and control the situation. The advantages of this are that it describes the behavior and it's easier to see uninfluenced behavior. But the disadvantages is that it doesn't control for all variables and it doesn't say why the experiment or people or animals are doing what they're doing, it just says what they're doing. Surveys are a technique for ascertaining the self-reported attitudes or behaviors of a particular group, usually by questioning a representative random sample of the group. The advantages are that you can get a generalized statistic, but the disadvantages are wording changes the results, and then always there's the chance of there being a sampling bias. So then there are some questions. They were asking us what would be the best research method to study each of these examples. So the best research method to study, people who have one or more hobbies report more job satisfaction than people with no hobbies. That would be best to study with a survey. Conjoined twins are stared at by younger children more often than by adults. That would be good to study with naturalistic observation. Unmarried cab drivers talk more with their customers than do married cab drivers. That would also be good for naturalistic observation. And then more men than women report fantasies of making large sums of money. That would be something that would be interesting to do with a case study. An example of the wording effect in surveys is with if you ask somebody, if you're doing a survey about something and you ask one person, how do you feel about giving aid to the needy? And you ask another person, how do you feel about welfare? You might be asking about the same thing, but the wording of it could change their response. A sampling bias, and what happens if you have a sampling bias, is a flawed sampling process that produces an unrepresentative sample. All right. Population is all those in a group being studied from which samples may be drawn. A random sample is a sample that fairly represents a population because each member has an equal chance of inclusion. So when you have a group of people that you're trying to pick a random sampling from, it's good to put a number and then choose a number instead of their names. And actually in my statistics class, we've worked on doing that, where you need to pick a number, and then if you're going for like different stuff, too much to explain in this video, but maybe I'll do another video about sampling bias within statistics if people are interested in that, because I can talk about that too. Correlation and experimentation. Correlation is a measure of the extent to which two variables change together, and thus of how well either variable predicts the other. Correlation coefficient is a statistical index of the relationship between two variables. Scatter plots are a graphed cluster of dots, each of which represents the values of two variables. A negative correlation is two sets of scores that relate inversely. One goes up as the other goes down. An example of a negative correlation is inner speech with psychological distress. So the more negative inner speech that you have, like negative self-talk, the more psychological distress that you'll have. But the more positive inner speech that you have, the less psychological stress you'll have. So if you have positive inner speech, then you will have less psychological distress, so the lines will be going in opposite directions. And a positive correlation is if two sets of scores tend to rise or fall together. For instance, people who are taller tend to have a higher average weight. So those two things go up at the same time. Correlation coefficients range from -1 to +1. What does it mean when a score is very close to -1 or +1? For example, the coefficient is -0.98 or +0.87, then the scores are nearly exactly correlated. What is an illusory correlation? The perception of a relationship where none exists. And then we have some definitions. Experiment, a research method that manipulates a situation to observe an effect. I'm not sure what I wrote something and I got confused. Sorry about that awkward pause. An experimental group is the group that is exposed to the experiment. The control group is the group that is not exposed to the experiment or the treatment. The randomly assigning is assigning by chance. A double-blind procedure is when both participants and staff are ignorant of who has the placebo. The placebo effect is experimental results caused by expectations alone. Independent variable is the manipulated factor. Confounding variable is a factor other than the independent variable that might produce an effect in the experiment. The dependent variable changes in response to the manipulation of the independent variable. Okay, so I'm going to reread the definition of experiment because now I figured out what that thing stands for. So experiment, research method that manipulates an independent variable to observe the effect. There we go. Then it goes through giving you some examples of the independent variable, dependent variable, experimental group, and control group, but I'm not going to read those right now because I have no way to know if my answers are right and I don't want to confuse people. What is validity? The extent to which a test or experiment measures or predicts what it's supposed to. Why is random assignment so important? To ensure an even and accurate answers. Statistical reasoning in everyday life. Why is it important to understand basic statistics in psych? Misinformation or misinterpretation of statistics can cause huge problems. Descriptive statistics are numerical data used to measure and describe the characteristics of groups. A histogram is a bar graph depicting a frequency distribution. Measures of central tendency. Mode, most frequently occurring scores in a distribution. Mean, arithmetic average of distribution. Median, the middle score in a distribution. And then measures of variation are range and standard deviation. Range is the difference between the highest and the lowest scores in a distribution, and standard deviation is a computed measure of how much scores vary around the mean score. What does it mean when data has a skewed distribution? How does this happen, and why could it be misleading? A representation of scores that lack symmetry around their average value is a skewed distribution. A few outliers on either end can change the mean and other calculations so that they are inaccurate to the real situation. Just like 2 more pages, guys. My voice is slowly dying, but that's cool. Why is standard deviation the most useful way of measuring how much scores deviate from one another? It better gauges whether scores are packed together or dispersed because it uses information from each score and assembles information about how much individual scores differ from the mean. And then it asks what the normal curve or normal distribution is. And so a normal curve kind of looks like a bell curve if you imagine the way that a bell looks, but kind of the bottom of it is stretched out really far. So maybe if you were drawing the shadow shape of a sun hat, like the silhouette of a sun hat, then you would draw a line down the center. And that would be where, in psychology, where the 100 would be on, for instance, an intelligence scale. Then within the main hat part is about I don't know. It's a little bit harder to explain. Again, that's something I'll go into during my statistics part if I ever do that. Math is really hard to explain with just the voice. You need to be able to see the numbers, so I probably won't. Then it says, define inferential statistics. Numerical data that allow one to generalize or to infer from simple data the probability of something being true of a population. What 3 principles should you keep in mind to make sure your generalizations are reliable? Representative samples are better than biased samples. Less variable observations are more reliable than those that are more variable. More cases are better than fewer. Define statistical significance. A statistical statement of how likely it is that an obtained result occurred by chance. What is the number that psychologists stick to for results to be statistically significant? Their odds of occurring by chance are less than 5%. Frequently asked questions about psychology. What is culture, and why does culture and gender matter in psychology? Shared ideas and behaviors that one generation passes on to the next, and then gender and culture pretty much influence everything about us. Then it says, read the section on ethics in animal research to help you respond to the following scenario, and then read this scenario and then explain why or why not you think it would be ethical. So I'm going to read this one to you because I think that might be something you can answer for yourself. So the two paragraphs provided say this. Professor King is a psychobiologist working on the frontiers of a new and exciting research area of neuroscience, canned brain grafting. Research has shown that neural tissue can be removed from the brains of monkey fetuses and implanted into the brains of monkeys that have suffered brain damage. The neurons seem to make the proper connections and sometimes are effective in improving performance in brain-damaged animals. These experiments offer important animal models for human degenerative diseases, such as Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. Professor King wants to transplant tissues from fetal monkey brains into the entorhinal cortex of adult monkeys. This is the area of the human brain that is involved with Alzheimer's disease. The experiment will use 20 adult rhesus monkeys. First, the monkeys will be subjected to ablation surgery in the entorhinal cortex. This procedure will involve anesthetizing the animals, opening their skulls, and making lesions using a surgical instrument. After their recovery, the monkeys will be tested on a learning task to make sure their memory is impaired. 3 months later, half of the animals will be given transplant surgery. Tissue taken from the cortex of monkey fetuses will be implanted into the area of the brain damage. Control animals will be subjected to the sham surgery, and all animals will be allowed to recover for 2 months. They will then learn a task to test the hypothesis that the animals having brain grafts will show better memory than the control group. Professor King argues that this research is in the exploratory stages and can only be done using animals. She further states that by the year 2030, about 72 million Americans will have Alzheimer's disease, and that her research could lead to treatment for the devastating memory loss that Alzheimer's victims suffer. I said that at the time that I wrote it and read it, I said that I would say, yes, we should do this. I would approve of this research because it could help save a lot of humans. I would say that it would not be ethical to do this experiment on humans. However, on monkeys, I think it's probably okay because they're monkeys. I know that a lot of people are really not happy with the idea of animal research, but if we do our research on humans, then a human dies. If we do our research on animals, then animals we eat them. So they're going to be dead anyway because we're eating them, so I think that there are some things that don't need to be done for experiments on animals, but this one, I thought personally that it would be okay to do it on an animal. You're allowed to have a different opinion, obviously, and that's kind of what the question is. It's giving you a scenario so that you can think about the ethical implications of it and whether it's an actually good idea or maybe we shouldn't do that. I don't know if this is a real scenario or not, it's just the one that the book was giving us. Describe the 4 basic ethical principles developed by the American Psychological Association that guide researchers with human participants. You have to obtain potential participants informed consent, which means you have to tell them the basics of the experiment and then have them consent to participating in the experiment after having known what it is, if it's that kind of experiment. You have to protect them from physical or emotional harm and discomfort. You have to keep information about the individual participants confidential, and you have to fully debrief people and explain the research afterwards, because sometimes it's an experiment where they have to not know what's happening, but they need to know the overall of it, but you have to tell them what happened afterwards. What does an IRB do and why is it important? An institutional review board screens research proposals and safeguards participants' well-beings to make sure that people who are about to make an experiment make sure that it's safe for all the people who are going to be in the experiment and that the participants of the experiment are safe during and after and before the experiment. And that's it. That's all of the information about psychology I have in my notes. I don't think that I'm going to read the book online because I think that would be pretty not legal, even though I've done a lot of things that aren't super legal because, storybooks reading online, but I feel like that's a good cause. The other stuff's good cause too, but I think that's something I could be more likely to be arrested for. I think I'm going to just cut that part out. We don't need to talk about it. Anyhow, I hope you guys enjoyed the series, that it was helpful to you, educational, and if you're studying for an AP test, they've already started. Mine is next week. So, good luck to everyone that's about to take a test right now, and I hope that my information was helpful to you. Have a great day, and I'll see you guys all in my next video. Bye!